Welcome, class. We're going to get to talk about Chapter 11 today. And while we focused on Chapter 10 mostly on romantic relationships, we're going to focus a little bit more on the friendship aspects that are highlighted in the chapter. So we'll go through today, we'll talk about some strategies of initiation and ways to show affection within a relationship, the functions of friendship, and ways in which friendship is benefited by interpersonal communication. Let's begin with the idea of friendship-based intimacy. Now, obviously, it's that feeling of understanding and emotional connection. It's a way of describing the people that you can go to, the people that you can trust, the people in your life that are meaningful insofar as they're somebody that you go to whenever you're having trouble or expect them to do the same thing for you. In passion-based intimacy, that's much more for romantic relationships. That's based obviously on the idea of romantic or sexual feelings for somebody. The connection that you feel ultimately between that person is to try to escalate towards that intimacy that's based in a relationship that is, as I say, intended much more romantically. We're going to be focused on friendships here, and I think that will help us for this chapter going forward. For friendship, obviously, there's ways to gradiate or ways to understand different friendships within your life. I always use this analogy, and I think it makes sense to people who grapple with it. You have your interior group of friends, the people who you're close with. And if I asked you to list your friends, you could list on your fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and all of these numbers would accumulate. However, if I told you, okay, out of those, who are better friends than them? You could do that. It might hurt people's feelings to know that they didn't make the cut, but you could effectively gradiate your list of friends down to your closest friends. Who's going to be in your wedding party? Who's going to, if you're so inclined to get married, who's going to be the person that you call first whenever a life event happens? Well, that quality, whenever we're discussing the values of a friendship, we're talking about the things that you are seeing in common with that person, things that make you either tighter with that person than another person, or also make it easier for you to relate to them, for you to see their point of view. Qualities that you attribute to friends are much more things that happen, like they make you laugh, or they're always the person who can make you feel better and are comforting and supportive. The common principles of friendship is that there's reciprocity. Remember, whenever we talk about the idea of reciprocity, what we're ultimately talking about is you get in the same amount that you put in, and you take out the same amount that you take out. What I mean by that is it's not an asymmetrical situation where one person is doing all the giving and one person is doing all the taking. The common expectations or principles of the friendship are at least consistent within that particular friend group. When you talk about making friends, obviously this is not going to be a master class in making friends, but instead it's to be able to give you the ability to talk with nuance and with specificity about really what makes a friend. The qualities and characteristics of friendship are not to be glossed over. Obviously, there's similarities in attitude. If you find the same things funny, if you enjoy the same things for television, for movies, for music, whatever it is that you most identify with, finding people who are similar to that makes for quick friends. When we talk about expectation what the other person will like us, there are certain characteristics or qualities of people that you think are in opposition to yours. Maybe it's an in-group, out-group sort of thing, or whatever it is that distances you from that person. But usually our friends are people that we had from the initial judgment phase, when we're interpreting based on all of the demographic stuff that we talked about in the early chapters. This is somebody that we expect will like us back. Reciprocity and self-disclosure is a fancy way, as we decipher it, of talking about when I share something intimate with you, you share something back intimately with me, so that I'm not ultimately telling you my life story and all the details of what makes me me, and you're kind of just saying and not really sharing. Reciprocity is important because reciprocity allows you to not only build a friendship, but build the sort of trust that's key to the friendships that we're talking about when we say interpersonal friendships. People who you not only share trust with, but that know you, know how you feel about situations. A good friend who you've shared very close interpersonal communication with is the sort of person who knows what you're thinking before you think it, who can help you finish your sentences, who's on the same wavelength of you. Why? Because they've heard the things that you've said, they've shared similar or at least as intense self-disclosure, and you relate in that way. Don't underestimate proximity to friendship. Especially when you're younger, why do you make friends? You make friends with the people who are around you. When you think about when you came to college, if you have what you think of is you have different groups of friends. You have friendships whenever you have early childhood friendships. You'd have high school friends, and some of those high school friends are now under a tremendous strain because they've become long distance. They're not going to the same college as you. Proximity means closeness, who's around you. Well, you make college friends on that very basis. In this part of your life that you all share because you're all undergraduates, people that you go to school with are people that you can build really intense connections with. But one of the deciding factors was in no uncertain terms that they were around. They were the people that were available to have this bond with. That went hand in hand with accessibility and availability. So when we talk about key qualities associated with friendship through time, this kind of gives you a good range for what I'm talking about when I say childhood, adolescence, young adult, adult, and late adulthood. All of these different types of friendships at different points in your life have different qualities, expectations. The values that we talked about earlier are more intense and more shared. As you get older, it is expected that some of your friends fall away. People move, they have families of their own. All of the proximity that we just got done talking about is gone. It's how many real friends do you want to keep in contact with that are from those old times, that are from those shared experiences that you find intensely personally gratifying, and that connection is meaningful enough for you to continue the difficult work of friendship. I want to highlight while we're looking at this slide, you can read all the qualities of each of the groups, but friendships are hard work. To be a good friend is to give a large part of yourself. It's to be available. It's to be earnest, to be honest, to allow them to interrupt your life. I always think of some of my dearest friends as people who, if they call you in the middle of the night when you're exhausted and you really need that sleep, you not only take that call, but you're enthusiastic to hear how they are. If they're going through something or they really need you, you want to be there for them. You care about trying to help by being the sounding board, by being the support system that they require. Well, that's intense. If you had, too many people doing that, or too many people in your life that had that sort of relationship with you, it could consume everything you do. You also have different sorts of relationships in your life. You might have a romantic partner. You might have somebody that you're married to. You might have children. All of these different sorts and types of relationships all of a sudden become trade-offs for time to spend with friends. It's why there's a classic movie trope or a classic kind of popular culture trope that says that as you get into relationships of romance, you start to let your friendships fall away. It's the example that is often used that says that you're the sort of person that when you get into a relationship, you shut your friends out because that relationship all of a sudden takes precedence over all of your friendships. We talk about those friendships at different stages in life. What I'm ultimately getting at was covered in the slide previous with that really good graphic image. But what I'm hoping that you understand is there's not only a transition in terms of the intensity or the effort that it requires to keep friendship, but you'll notice that in each one of these groupings, I'm going to flip back to the slide so you can see the pictograph I'm talking about. Each one of these has different expectations of what's going to happen. Friends fulfill different roles in your life. When you're very young, it's somebody to play with. It's somebody to spend time communally with, doing nothing but enjoying oneself. I think back to playing outside or to playing video games together. When you talk about adolescence and young adulthood, the change that happens here is there's an intensification of what's expected. The norms of behavior of that friendship change. What you share, what you talk about. You start to become more other-centered. You focus more on what they have to say. You're learning from one another. You're growing together or apart, depending upon the friendship. But those things change over time. When you were young, proximity might be the only thing you needed in order to make a good friend. That's my best friend. Why? Because we're in the same class together, right? But when you get to adulthood and late adulthood, the connections that you have with the people who are a big part of your life come from socialization. Sometimes they come from the workplace rather than school. Notice that transition, that once you've graduated, your college friends will all be hopefully getting jobs, finding professions. And when they do, they're going to be exposed to different groups of people that they might share values with, that obviously share an interest in the same profession that they've chosen to pursue. See how it starts to change with each grouping in terms of what's expected, how easy it is to make friends, and how hard it is to keep friends. That's what we're really getting at when we talk about different stages of life. Now, obviously, there's same-sex friendships and there's cross-sex friendships. Each one has different merits and flaws, and each one demands its own sort of attention. When I say same-sex friendships, I'm talking about male friends for men and female friends for women. What I mean here is when I say expectations and functions, there's certain things that you, at least culturally, there's a normative expectation that you do with your girlfriends or your guy friends that's different than whenever you have a cross-sex friendship or you have a mixed group of different genders together. There are certain things that you talk about. Particularly and obviously the one that springs to mind is when you're a people of the same sex or a friend of the same sex, you might share the intimate details about who you're attracted to, about what's going on in your romantic relationships. When it's not always the case to say that that doesn't happen in cross-sex friendships, it's more readily available or expected because you typically, if you're heterosexual, are sharing those same feelings with somebody in a same-sex relationship. Sexuality, when laid over these two types of friendships, definitely changes the expectations and changes some of the norms. If you think about it that way, it a lot of times inverts so that people who are identifying and feeling homosexual feelings relate easier to one sex or the other. It's a much more complicated dynamic. What we're talking about here is the traditional heterosexual normative behaviors described in the book here. When we say functions too, who do you go out with? When you go out with certain groups, what do you do that's different between one group versus the other? Cross-sex friendships carry with them the certain idea that there are challenges of attraction and that can you really have platonic friends? When we talk about platonic friends, we talk about cross-sex friendships that are interpersonal in their nature, in which neither side feels any sexual or romantic attraction to the other person, and instead values them just for the friendship support that they offer. Those are considered to be one of the rarest types of friendship, but can be certainly very intense and bring with them all of the qualities and characteristics that are positive from any other sort of friendship. Diverse friendships offer their own different categories of benefit to you when seeking an interpersonal connection with somebody. It's the ability to learn from other cultures by getting to know and befriend people within that particular culture. When you're doing cultural immersion, if you find yourself going and studying abroad, or you find yourself leaving the country, when you make friends who are native to that country, you learn a lot from them in what you share and what you talk about, and the way they speak about the world, the way they speak about their friendships. You'll learn through that conversation and through that observation to see things through their eyes and to understand the world as they're starting to create it. You can have cultural or racial epiphanies on the basis of the friends that share things with you. Intergenerational friendships are also highlighted as incredibly important because older to younger friendships allow a certain mentorship, stewardship, support system. Typically, an older friend offers advice. It goes both ways, but you can glean a lot from somebody who's not only been there in a similar situation, but has that lived experience that allows them to offer you the sort of social support that you need, to offer the sort of advice that you need that's predictive in its station, that tells you not really what to do, but what might happen if you do certain things. That's what we're talking about when we talk about diverse friendships and what they can offer to your life. Different than people who are from your same cultural group, from your same age group. There's an intensity of interpersonal connection that is born in sameness, and there is in diversity too. And each of those types of friendships can gather different things for you in your life. When we're talking about strategies to make these types of relationships better, to connect with people, to be able to have these available to you, we'll talk about a series of 4 things. Strategies that are used primarily to initiate a relationship. You can observe and act on approachability cues. If somebody is available, welcoming, saying hi, smiling, making eye contact, those are all cues that let you know that they're willing to have a conversation with you, and that all friendships begin with some type of communication. Whether it be that nonverbal communication of openness and availability, and then leading to the direct communication, or perhaps direct communication that intensifies that nonverbal connection. But there's a reciprocity there. There's a connection. There's a symmetry between those availability cues and the creation of a friendship. You can, also follow initiation norms. When you first meet somebody, you start to ask them questions about themselves. When you were introduced to your dorm mate, if you live on campus, you started to ask them about what they liked, where they grew up, how old they were. You gained information with these questions, and as the questions intensify, you start to build a profile of a person. You start to see whether or not they are that sort of person that you find valuable or would want to be friends with. Remember, friendship, because it is difficult, holds with it an evaluative characteristic. You're trying to find those similarities beyond proximity. We need to be friendly because we're in the same spot, but will we really be friends? Questions, approachability cues, conversations, and initiation norms will help guide you to the answer to that question. When we talk about initiating or escalating relationships, obviously we communicate to cultivate attraction. What I talk about when I say you glean information to find similarity. But whenever you're talking about open and accurate disclosure, there comes with it the desire to reduce uncertainty. Whenever we're talking about URT, or uncertainty reduction theory, it is the idea that all human beings have a certain desire to be sure enough about the person that we're with that we know their values, that we know principles about them that guide us to say, well, this person would do that or would not do that. Can I bring this subject matter up with this particular person? Is based on reducing uncertainty through questions about it. A typical example of this might be you're having a problem with your parents, and you're very angry and you kind of want to vent about that. But the person that you have as a potential venting option is somebody who portrays their relationship with their parents as constantly good, never kind of identifying or making themselves vulnerable by talking about times when they and their parents might not get along. Well, you may have a resistance with sharing information like that with this person because they might not be able to relate. What's a strategy that you can use to intensify relationships yourself? You can listen actively and respond effectively. When I talk about listening actively and responding effectively, it's the ability to repeat back what someone says to you in different words to try to make sure that they know that you got what they were trying to say. It's the ability to respond effectively in a way that continues the conversation. Everyone can relate to having a conversation with someone who gives either short answers that kind of stop a conversation dead in its tracks, or they don't leave open the possibility for a continuance of conversation because they are not reciprocating. They are not sharing something in kind. You either open up opportunities for discourse with what you say, or you shut down avenues of discourse with certain methods of response. The way that you respond lets a conversation continue or kills it dead in its tracks. When we talk about socially decenter and adopt an other-oriented perspective, what we talk about is in terms of a relationship, you have the possibility of focusing only on that other person's needs and not worrying about your own. Talked a lot about reciprocity and that you give and take within a relationship. But once you have a relationship, when you talk about intensifying it, it's the ability to put that person's needs above your own. It's the ability for sometimes, when needed, to be able to be focused on them and nothing else. That kind of intense caring, affection, and giving of oneself allows that relationship to intensify in ways that a tit for tat would not. It still happens with reciprocity. If you show somebody that kind of care when they're going through a difficult time, the feeling would be, in terms of that very first slide we really talked about on this chapter, that they would do the same for you. That's what I talk about when I talk about direct reciprocity. It doesn't mean that it happens in the same communicative exchange. It means that it happens longitudinally over the course of the relationship. Strategies used to escalate or maintain relationships also involve expressing emotion and providing comfort and social support. When I talk about expressing emotion, obviously, let's use that dorm mate example. All of your first questions revolved around demographic things. Where do you live? Where did you grow up? How old are you? What sorts of music do you like? Blah, 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 right? Small talk is another way of thinking about that. It's important and it serves a relational function. But when you talk about how you really feel about things, when you talk about your emotions, you make yourself vulnerable. And vulnerability can either make or break a relationship. If someone takes advantage or makes light or makes you feel small when you feel vulnerable, you shut off to that person. If that person hears you, listens effectively, and responds effectively, then expressing emotion intensifies a relationship because they're providing the kind of comfort and social support that you need in order to be able to get through things. In our culture, there's a certain expectational norm that we're strong, we're individual. The capitalist society revolves around pulling oneself up by one's own bootstraps, being self-reliant, the American dream, right? But all of those things can also be true that during those times when you're trying to be the best you that you can be, you also have feelings and emotions that need to be expressed, shared with another human being, reciprocated, responded to, acknowledged in some capacity. And that's what interpersonal relationships provide for you. They provide you an avenue and an outlet to perform that particular life function for yourself. We'll conclude with this. Communicating and engaging in relational talk, being tolerant and tactful, and managing conflict cooperatively are all ways that are necessary to help continue a relationship, to maintain it. You are going to have problems in any relationship, no matter how good. All relationships involve conflict. How do we manage that? You manage conflict in win-win situations. You try to not make it a win-lose situation. You try to highlight the opportunity or option to negotiate so that you both feel satisfied with outcomes. You're tolerant and tactful of disagreement. Just because I disagree with you on this point doesn't mean that our relationship ends. Regardless of what political party you find yourself affiliating with, if somebody is of the opposite political party, you shouldn't shut them out of your life. You shouldn't become intolerant. You shouldn't lose your tact and attack them personally. You shouldn't throw things about a relationship away because you happen to disagree. When we talk about relational talk, what I mean is saying to somebody how much they mean to you. It can be something as simple when you talk about the early stages of life, of giving somebody a gift, a friendship bracelet, one of those little necklaces that are cracked in half that say best friends. But more than that, later in life, saying, you're one of my best friends, I care about you. Whenever you hear somebody say something like that, even if it's small, even if you've just got done venting and you're like, thanks for listening to me, and they're like, anytime you're one of my best friends, I'm happy to hear you, or happy to talk to you about these things. That intensifies relationship. Acknowledging that you have a relationship and that it matters to you and that you care about it really does help to not only define your relationship, but intensify the quality, and it really does help to set the nature of the relationship as one that is set to grow and intensify rather than wither and die. So today we've talked about what relationships are, how they really get together, some of the engagement strategies to make and maintain them and make them better. And we've ended, hopefully, in understanding what benefits that they can bring to you and why different relationships are meaningful within your life. Any of these could provide opportunities for discussion, responses, and I think that any one of them would be fruitful to be able to talk about experiences from your own life. I'm not asking you to write an intensely personal journal article or anything like that. I'm expecting instead for you to be able to talk about different friends in your life. Use anonymous names. Change them if you want. But you can compare and contrast the qualities of friendships to be able to highlight things that happen in the chapter. Test these theories. Let me know whether or not you agree with them or not. At any rate, I look forward to reading your responses, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Take care, and I look forward to talking to you about Chapter 12 next.